The first time Brenda Voss tried to find me for using my own generator, I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my coffee. The second time I found a black extension cable buried under pine needles, running from my shed straight toward her cottage. By the third time, I understood Brenda did not want quiet, safety, or community standards. She wanted control over anything she could not own. I had moved to Pine Hollow Lake for the same reason most people end up there. I wanted less noise in my life. Not silence exactly. Nobody gets silence near a lake. There are loons at sunrise, boat motors on Saturdays, and old men arguing about fishing knots like it is a matter of national security. But it was honest noise. The kind that did not follow you through a grocery store parking lot or show up in your mailbox with a threat printed in red ink. My place was a small cedar cabin at the end of a gravel lane, tucked behind white pines, with a narrow dock, a dented canoe, and a backup generator I had rebuilt over 2 winters. That machine was ugly as sin, loud when it first warmed up, and more dependable than half the people I had worked with in the city. When storms rolled through and the power lines went down, it kept my freezer cold, my well pump running, and my place lit up enough that I could make coffee without feeling like I was camping in a cave. The people around the lake understood that. Walt Fenner lived across the inlet and had been there long enough to remember when the road was dirt all the way to the county line. The Morales family rented the yellow cottage near the boat ramp every summer and always brought me peach cobbler in a pan I was expected to return clean. Nobody told anybody how to live. We waved, borrowed tools, kept an eye on each other's places, and let the lake do the rest. Then Brenda bought the old Haskins cottage on the bend. She arrived in late May with a rented moving truck, 2 landscapers, a stack of white plastic planters, and a clipboard pressed against her chest like it was a badge. At first I figured she was just organized. There's nothing wrong with organized. I have a shelf in my shed where every wrench has a spot, and I sleep better because of it. But Brenda had a different kind of organized, the kind that needs an audience. Within a week, she was asking people where they kept their trash bins, whether their porch lights matched, and who had approved the color of Walt's canoe. The funny part was, nobody had approved anything because Pine Hollow was not a subdivision. It was a handful of old cabins, a county road, and a lot of trees. There was no homeowners association, no board, no dues, no office, no president. Brenda took that information the way some folks take bad news from a doctor. She heard it, but she refused to believe it. The first time she came up to my porch, I was sanding the rail before a storm. She looked past me toward the shed and said, in that careful voice people use when they are trying not to sound rude, that my generator was an eyesore and a possible disturbance to the peaceful character of the neighborhood. I said, Brenda, the peaceful character of this neighborhood is mostly mosquitoes and raccoons. She did not smile. She told me she was drafting community guidelines. I told her she could draft them on whatever paper made her happiest, but they would not apply to my cabin. Her lips tightened, and for a second I saw something under all that polish. Not just annoyance, but the kind of anger that comes from realizing a person cannot be managed. After that, every conversation felt like a match being struck near dry leaves. And the night I found that cable in the grass, I knew Brenda had decided talking was no longer enough. I followed that cable slowly at first, hoping I was wrong, hoping maybe somebody had dropped an old extension cord while hauling firewood, but it kept going, tucked under wet leaves and pine needles, slipping past the edge of my property and disappearing beneath the brush toward Brenda's place. By the time I reached the far end, my stomach had gone tight. The cord was plugged into a power strip beside her back steps, feeding a lamp through the kitchen window, a little electric heater near the wall, and a string of patio lights blowing over her freshly planted flower boxes. For a minute, I just stood there looking at it, because there are some things so bold they almost make you question your own eyes. Brenda had spent weeks telling everyone my generator was dangerous, ugly, selfish, and bad for the neighborhood, and she had quietly run a line from it to keep her own house comfortable. I wanted to yank the cord loose right then, but something in me said not yet. I took pictures from where I stood, then I walked back to my cabin and sat on the porch until the sun went down behind the trees. The generator hummed steadily behind the shed, and every few seconds I could see that warm little glow from Brenda's kitchen through the woods. It was my fuel, my work, my electricity lighting up the house of a woman who had been calling me a problem all summer. The next morning I crossed the lane before I had time to talk myself out of it. Brenda opened her door wearing a pale blue cardigan and those oversized sunglasses she wore even when the sky was gray. She looked at me like she'd been expecting a delivery, not a confrontation. "Morning, Ethan," she said. "I was actually planning to send you a notice about the noise situation." I held up my phone. "Before you do that, maybe you can tell me why there is a cable running from my generator to your back porch." Her face changed so fast it was almost impressive. First surprise, then irritation, then that polished little smile people use when they think they can talk their way around a problem. "Oh, that," she said. "I assumed it was available during outages. You know, as a neighborhood resource." I stared at her. "Brenda, it is a generator behind my shed." "Yes, but we're all affected when one household has power and everyone else does not." "You mean you are affected?" That landed harder than I expected. Her smile disappeared. She looked past me toward the lake, then back at me, and for the first time I caught a flicker of something besides arrogance. She looked embarrassed. Not sorry, exactly, but embarrassed that I had seen behind the curtain. Later I found out from Lorna Pierce, who lived 2 caverns over, that Brenda had sunk most of her savings into fixing up the Haskins place. New windows, new flooring, a remodeled kitchen she could not really afford. When a storm knocked out power for 2 nights, her refrigerator spoiled, her space heater quit, and suddenly the woman who loved telling everyone else what they should do had to sit in the dark like the rest of us. Maybe that was where it began. Maybe she looked across the trees, saw my porch light glowing, and decided that because she needed something, she had a right to take it. Need has a way of turning into entitlement when a person has spent too long believing the world should bend for them. I told her to disconnect the line before sunset. I kept my voice calm, but I made it clear that I was done pretending this was a misunderstanding. Brenda crossed her arms and said, "You are being needlessly hostile. A real community shares resources." I said, "A real community asks first." Then I turned around and walked away, because I knew if I stayed another minute, I was going to say something neither one of us could take back. For 2 days, the cord stayed where it was. Brenda did not disconnect it. Instead, she started her little campaign. The first notice showed up on the telephone pole near the boat ramp. "Community violation," it said in large red letters, followed by a list of supposed offenses: unauthorized generator operation, excessive nighttime noise, failure to comply with neighborhood standards. My name was printed at the bottom like I was some kind of public nuisance. By that evening, 3 more notices had appeared around the lake. Worf brought one over and handed it to me with a grin. "You know," he said, "I have been coming here 40 years, and I must have missed the meeting where we elected her queen." I laughed, but it did not feel funny anymore. There was something mean under it now. Brenda was not just trying to get power from me. She was trying to turn the other neighbors against me so she would not look like the thief in the story. The following week, she escalated again. A red envelope was taped to my door. "Stand file. Warning. Demanding $1,500 in fines from an HOA that existed only in Brenda's imagination." Then someone painted an orange stripe across the side of my mailbox. Not enough to destroy it, just enough to say, "I can get close to your home whenever I want." That was the part that got under my skin. I had lived in cities before. I understood petty people, bad bosses, noisy neighbors, all the little ways strangers could make you feel crowded. But Pine Hollow had been the one place where I thought I could close my door and breathe. Brenda had found a way to bring that old feeling back, so I stopped treating her like an annoyance. I put every flyer, every letter, every photo into a folder. I wrote down dates and times. I took pictures of the cable before I touched it. Then I traced it all the way back to the place where it entered her property. I also called the county office and asked one simple question. Was there any homeowners association registered for Pine Hollow Lake? The woman on the phone paused, checked twice, then said, "Sir, there is no HOA on that road." I thanked her, wrote down her name, and sat there for a long time looking at the empty chair across from me. The truth was, I did not want Brenda arrested. I did not want some dramatic showdown. I wanted her to take the cord down, apologize, and let us all go back to our lives. But people like Brenda hear kindness as weakness. The next Friday, I made a decision. I shut off the cabin lights early, parked my truck behind the shed, and waited on the porch with a thermos of coffee and my phone in my hand. Just after 10, I saw 2 flashlights moving through the trees. Brenda was there, and she was not alone. Lorna was with her, nervous and hunched over, holding a coil of heavier cable against her chest. I could not hear everything at first, but then the wind shifted, and Brenda's voice carried across the yard. "He is gone," she whispered. We will hook up a proper line this time. He will not even know. Lorna said something I could barely make out. Then Brenda snapped, "Do you want to spend another night without heat or not?" I watched them move toward my shed, watched Brenda kneel beside the generator with that same clipboard lying in the grass beside her like a holy book. She reached for the connection point, and every muscle in my body tightened, because I knew that in about 5 seconds the whole lake was going to hear what she had been doing. The moment Brenda grabbed the connection, the tamper alarm kicked on. A hard metallic blast that tore through the trees and bounced across the lake like somebody had set off a fire siren in a church parking lot. Years earlier, after someone had messed with the generator panel while I was away, I had paid a licensed electrician to add a simple alarm and automatic shut-off system. Nothing dramatic, nothing dangerous, just enough to cut the power and make sure anybody tampering with it knew they had been caught. Brenda jerked backwards so fast she lost her balance and landed in the wet grass, her clipboard flipping out of her hand, while Lorna dropped the cable and covered both ears. For 1 second, everything went quiet except for the alarm, and Brenda breathing hard like she had just run uphill. Then porch lights started coming on all around the lake. Doors opened. Dogs barked. Walt appeared first in his bathrobe and old work boots, carrying a flashlight in one hand and a cane in the other, and behind him came the Morales family. Then 2 more neighbors from the far side of the bend. By the time I stepped off my porch, half the road was looking toward my shed. Brenda saw me and froze. She had that look people get when they have spent so long building a story in their head that they cannot understand why everyone else is suddenly seeing the real one. I walked over slowly, phone in hand, and said, "Evening, Brenda. Rough night for community resource management." She opened her mouth, then pointed at the shed. "You set me up." I looked at the cable on the ground, then at the open panel she had been reaching toward. "No, Brenda. Brenda, you walked onto my property at 10 o'clock at night with an extension line." Walt let out a sound somewhere between a laugh and a cough. Lorna stood there shaking, eyes fixed on the grass, and finally said, "She told me it was okay. She said Ethan had left town." Brenda spun toward her so fast I thought she might slap her, but she stopped herself when she noticed everybody watching. That was the thing about Brenda. She was fearless when people were alone, but crowds made her nervous because crowds could compare stories. She tried to recover, straightened her cardigan, picked up her clipboard and said, "I was inspecting an unsafe power source on behalf of the neighborhood association." There was a pause, the kind that feels longer than it is, and then Walt said, "Honey, the only association around here is us associating you with trouble." That broke the tension. People laughed, not cruelly at first, more like they could not believe they had let this woman intimidate them for months. Brenda's face went red, then white. She started talking faster, saying I was dangerous, saying the generator was illegal, saying she had every right to make sure the community was protected. I did not argue. I just held up my phone and said, "I have pictures of the first cable going to your house, copies of every fake fine you gave me, and video of you standing beside my generator tonight. You want to call the sheriff, Brenda? Go ahead." She did call them, probably because she still thought official uniforms would somehow make her story true. 2 deputies arrived the next afternoon after she spent the morning telling anyone who would listen that I had threatened her. They listened to her first, then they walked over to my porch, and I showed them everything. The photos, the letters, the orange paint on my mailbox, the cable, the video. I also gave them the name of the county clerk who had confirmed there was no registered HOA at Pine Hollow Lake. One deputy flicked through Brenda's so-called violation notices and actually had to hide a smile. Then he looked at her and said, "Ma'am, you cannot create an HOA because you bought a clipboard. You also cannot enter someone else's property, take their electricity, or issue fake fines." Brenda tried to interrupt, but he held up a hand and added, "And just so we are clear, needing power does not give you permission to take it." That was the first time I saw her run out of words. She ended up with citations for trespassing and tampering, and the deputies told her the rest could be handled in court if I decided to pursue it. I did not enjoy watching her walk back to her cottage that day. Not exactly. There was a part of me that felt sorry for her, because beneath all the control and the fake authority, I think Brenda was scared. She had bought more house than she could afford, moved somewhere she did not understand, and instead of asking for help when things got hard, she tried to make everybody else smaller so she could feel bigger. But understanding someone is not the same as excusing them. A few weeks later, she put her cabin up for sale. The flyers stopped. The fines disappeared. Nobody saw the clipboard again. Pine Hollow went back to being what it had always been, a place where people borrowed sugar, watched each other's docks during storms, and minded their own business unless someone truly needed help. And my generator kept humming behind the shed, ugly as ever, dependable as ever, doing exactly what it was supposed to do. So tell me this, was I right to wait and gather proof, or should I have cut Brenda off the first time I found that cable? Where do you draw the line between being patient with a difficult neighbor and letting them believe they can take whatever they want? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because I have a feeling people are going to see this one very differently.